Hey, Fabricators, thanks for joining us once again as we dig into another one of the Microsoft Fabric experiences to see what we can do with it, what it's for, and how we use it. And this time, we're looking at the Data Factory experience. So if you've used some of Data Factory out in the data platform world in the past, some of it will be familiar, some of it won't be. So we'll take a look, see how you use it, and go from there. As always, if you are new around here, don't forget to like and subscribe. And as we start to dig into it, once again, I am joined by our Chief Fabricator, Craig. Welcome back to the show.
Hello. Back again.
Back again after more holiday. How's it going? You well?
Yeah, good. Run out of holiday now, so that's me.
That's the way it should be. Alrighty. Okay, so what are we looking at today?
So we're going to talk about Data Factory, as you said. And if I click into the experience, similar kind of overview that you would normally see with the other experiences that we've talked about. I'm currently looking at my workspace, so I can only see the data pipeline option here at the moment. But if I click over to one of our Fabric-enabled workspaces, jump back to that home option, I can see that I'm presented with two different options. So I've got the option to do data flow Gen 2 or data pipeline. So with data flows, that's aimed at you doing some kind of light transformations. That's familiar if you're coming from a Power BI background, whereas your data pipeline option there is ADF. That's Azure Data Factory. That's your orchestration tool that allows you to connect up to other tools to move your data from A to B, and you're actually primarily doing that transformation using another tool.
All right, so just to make sure people got it in mind, if they're not coming from the data platform, data factory kind of world. So I guess if you are coming from that world, this is going to be super familiar. You're like, okay, yeah, data factory, I get it, it's fine.
Yeah.
If you're not, and you're on the Power BI side of the fence, and you've suddenly got all these extra Fabric capabilities suddenly appear. So we're thinking about orchestration. So if you've got a load of different things, and you need to run it in a certain order, do this, and then do each of these things, then do this kind of thing. That's going to be our data pipelines. That's how we think about Data Factory. Yeah. Whereas Data Flows Gen 2 is going to be familiar to people on the Power BI side, not so much on the data platform side. And it's more your mapping data flows kind of data transformation tool wrapped inside of things. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep, yeah. Exactly.
Everyone on the same page? That's what we're talking about. Two different worlds colliding into the new Data Factory experience.
Yeah, getting the best of both worlds brought together.
Cool.
So if I just jump into my workspace, so I've got a pre-created data flow here, and just pulled this together essentially using the Microsoft Learn kind of guidance. So that's bringing some customer data together that starts off in CSV and our orders data, doing some transformations and just getting that kind of output table from those customers to be able to rank them based on orders. So I'm doing some transformations between these. And the main kind of piece here is I'm manipulating that data. I can bring different data sets together and work with it. And from a Power BI perspective, we've got all the kind of steps down the right-hand side. The key thing here is I can then do something with the data. I can then push that as a data destination out to my lakehouse. So I can use that as that ETL tool to pull from tables, do that transformation, and then push it out to my lakehouse. If I get rid of this destination, I can add additional destinations for warehouse as well, or push it out to a separate SQL database.
Okay, so this is, again, for Power BI folks that are used to writing Power Query, there'd be just do this inside of Power Query when building their model, generally, originally. And then when Gen 2 came out, it's more about actually how you have multiple steps down and how you put your data down and then use it for multiple things. And that's what we've got now inside of Fabric. If you're trying to manipulate data and you want a low-code way of doing it, then you've got this as a nice graphical tool to say, get data from these places, combine them, aggregate them, transform them, put it over there. That's how people should be thinking about this, right?
Yeah, essentially. I mean, I wouldn't use data flows for moving data from like bronze to silver, where I'm dealing with many different tables. I'd use my data pipelines for that, and I'd push things into a notebook. I would parameterize it so that I can process multiple tables through the same process.
Yeah. So this is very much kind of, so this is almost like hard coding logic, right? This is saying for this specific data set I'm trying to build, these are the specific steps I want you to go through. So really good if you're building a data model with a load of business logic and you want someone to own it who's not necessarily a Spark developer, not necessarily data engineering, kind of more understanding the business logic and transformations. They can just get this nice visual. Here's the steps it goes through to make that data. Yeah?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Okay. Makes sense.
So if I jump back to the, I can close that interface and exit. And if I jump back to my workspace, obviously we've got a lot of other components in here in the workspace. We've been doing things, we've been developing PCs as we've been making the videos and talking about things. When you do create those data flows, it actually generates these staging lake houses in the background and a staging warehouse in the background. Now that will be obfuscated away. You won't see that when we're going into GA, and that's just there to allow you to kind of move data around and work with it. But because we've got a lot of things in here, I can go up to this filter pane. I can go down to product and just click data factory, and then that's just showing me what I want to see just now. So that's just filtering down to what we want to work with.
Yep.
Now, if I go into a pipeline that I've created already, so this is just a really basic pipeline, like your kind of starter pipeline. I've used the tutorial for this, or essentially the copy data assistant, and that's allowed me to connect to a source. If I click on that, it's allowed me to connect to a source, connect to my destination, which is my lakehouse, and pick the tables I want, and then it just builds out that pipeline for us. And essentially what that's doing is I'm passing through an array of table names, I'm looping over them, and I'm doing a copy data action, which is copying that data into the Delta tables in my bronze zone. So that's the kind of primary use of the pipeline component of Data Factory. And it is quite a similar interface to Azure Data Factory. The kind of for each loop, we've got the copy data components and all the elements that you'd need to set up for that. So setting the source, setting the destination, if we want to map any fields or schemas and things like that, and then additional settings. They're all pretty familiar.
Yep.
Where it changes is our activities across the top. So we've got a list of all the activities that we can work with. There's a couple of new ones in there that are specific to Fabric. So the ability to connect up Teams and Office 365 Outlook as well, which is pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly, it all looks very familiar. The design canvas and the parameters and everything, it all looks, that is just, it's Data Factory. It keeps me happy. It's got my familiarity there. But yeah, looks like there's definitely a very different selection of activities you can get. So it'll be a little bit confusing for people as they first go in there trying to find where things are, but yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, it's a familiar look and feel. There are some components that aren't quite aren't there at the moment. So things like the ability to connect to on-premises, or if we want to actually connect up to a notebook outside of Fabric, that functionality isn't there.
Okay, and that's going to be a real jarring gap for people, right? So currently you can use Data Factory to say, go reach into my on-prem systems and suck data into Azure, and then start my data platform. Go and connect to loads of different things and pull data into Azure is what Data Factory is very, very good at.
Yeah.
And so people who are going to try and migrate those things over, that's not in Fabric yet. So we need to be a little bit careful about kind of what things it can and can't talk to in this preview state. And it's something we hope is going to be fixed up by GA.
Yeah, definitely. One of the other key things, like we've touched on this a couple of times in the past, is around the Git integration. So because we don't have that kind of across the full platform at the moment, so it doesn't capture everything that's in your workspace, just your Power BI reports. If I was to start building out components in here, so if I wanted that for each to be followed by running a notebook, maybe I want to do something else in here. For example, do a quick lookup before I do that to get some metadata. Unless I can get this working, and unless I have all these components filled out where I need to add in additional settings, I can't close that window because I have to work with that and get that validated so that I can save that, so that it saves it inside Fabric. But that's something that will be fixed when the Git integrations.
It's like the old days of Synapse. Oh.
yeah. And back to 2018 and
Yeah.
Azure Data Factory, yeah.
Cool. Okay, but still some gaps. But again, preview expecting all those gaps to be plumbed by GA kind of makes sense. So what about people coming from the Power BI side? And this is the first time they've kind of seen of this idea of orchestration, really. So I guess one of the things for people to be like sort of clear on is we've looked at the warehouses and you've got loads of SQL scripts. We've had a quick look at data engineering and you've got this idea of a Spark notebook. This is how you stitch all that stuff together, right? If you say run those 10 SQL scripts need to be run, and then there's another SQL script that needs to be run, this is the tool, this is the experience that you use to do that. Building out do this first, then run this, then run this, then run this. This is how often it should run. You've got to schedule this and say, well, this is how often to trigger this pipeline. So I guess people who aren't that familiar with Data Factory are going to become very familiar with this if they're starting to use the other Fabric experiences and having to go, well, I've got a Power BI model and I'm using Direct Lake, so I'm expecting data to be in the lake. How do I tell it to like refresh those tables? This is how you do it. Like building out this schedule of this is the stuff I want to run, and this is how each thing goes into it.
Yeah, exactly. This is going to be your, for one of a better phrase, your orchestration tool for moving data around Fabric and working with it. And whether you're using that SQL engine and you're executing stored procedures or you're running some SQL, you can do that in here. Or if you're running your notebooks, we've got the ability to just, because it's all inside Fabric, I've got the ability to just start looking at notebooks that are readily available. I don't need to be making external connections and things like that. So that kind of deeper integration, especially when we kind of look at the copy data, the ability to choose a destination and immediately you're just like, is it Lakehouse, KQL database, or your data warehouse? And then you're selecting it from everything that you see in your warehouse. So it takes a little bit of that kind of friction away from the Data Factory approach because we've got everything in the same place now with Fabric.
That's fair. And there's some things in here which, again, it's going to be really confusing to people just coming straight to this in terms of which is just straight ports of ways of working. And you can see it there when you're talking about Data Factory. You've got the expression language, which is a thing called dynamic content. So you've got the add dynamic content button. And all the way through Data Factory, there's lots of different ways of making it variable driven, expression driven. They can say, well, run this SQL statement. Oh, actually, this time I want you to run that SQL statement. Next time I want you to run that SQL statement. And a lot of the whole idea of using Data Factory is trying to make it, I want to make it as generic as possible and just make it do different things by pushing these buttons. And that's going to be a whole thing for people to get into learning kind of how that expression language works, how to parameterize things, how to write as fewer activities as possible and just make it reusable. But yeah, we're not going to go into that now.
Yeah. I'm glad you weren't going to quiz me on some syntax there for the expression language.
Love it. I love it and hate it because it is the only place that expression language exists. And so who doesn't love learning a language just for a really specific tool? Great. Cool. Okay. So if someone is thinking about just moving data from A to B, not transforming it, not changing it, just saying, pick data from here, put it there, then they're inside the pipelines and they're using the copy activity. If they've got some logic somewhere else, like a SQL statement or a Spark statement, and they're trying to execute it, they're still in a pipeline, but they're using activities to trigger those different things.
Yeah.
If someone doesn't want to use SQL or Spark and they want to use Power Query and essentially kind of or a low-code interface to build out those transformation steps, then they're in data flows.
Yeah, exactly.
But if they want to execute a data flow and trigger a data flow, they can do that through pipelines.
Yes.
Cool. Okay. Hopefully that's making sense to people in terms of how to think about these two tools. Orchestrate stuff or just move data A to B. That's going to be in like your pipelines. Actually just transform data using low code. That's going to be data flows. Get those two in your head and you'll be happy with what these tools do.
Yeah, exactly. And like coming back to that kind of home screen where you've got those options coming into data pipelines, if I break the cardinal rule and just leave that called pipeline 1, we've got that kind of guidance at the start. So it's like we can talk about copying data and it guides you along from data source, defining the data source, connecting to that data source, choosing your destination, connecting and defining the tables that you want. And it kind of carries you through quite easily. So it's, for those that aren't familiar with Data Factory, it's easy to get started and kind of see where those components in that kind of core copy data activity fits in.
Yep.
And then you can start adding on components, whether you're connecting to a SQL source to kind of drive metadata, or you're then doing a subsequent step after that to call a data flow, for example, to do that last kind of silver to gold transformation on a table.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so any pitfalls? We've mentioned some of the activities people are looking for aren't here. Some of the connectivity to on-prem and things aren't here yet. Anything else that's going to be slightly jarring to people coming from the data platform, Data Factory into Fabric and trying to do the same thing?
Yeah, so the main thing is that interface change. So where you would normally have everything quite easily available down the left-hand side, it's now up the top. You've got a list of all the activities out here. There's a little bit more of that detail here. And it's significantly more simplified, which makes it a little bit easier. But obviously, like coming from that familiar ADF interface, there's going to be a little bit of a change of trying to find where things are and making sure that you've got the right place for things and you know where to run it. So I can do that same kind of validate run on my data pipeline. And instead of setting up triggers, it's a schedule that I'm setting up. So most of it's the same. And as we've talked about already, some of the components are missing, or there's some that aren't quite in place yet with Fabric.
There's some notable things missing. So, other Spark providers you don't have links out to if you're trying to link in something like Databricks. Even Synapse. Yeah. So I don't think you've got a connector to go and execute anything in Synapse currently. So if you're trying to do something a little bit hybrid between Fabric and Synapse, I don't think you've got the ability to do that.
Yeah, exactly. So your notebooks are purely focused within Fabric at the moment. So if you're coming from, or if you've got a Synapse implementation, you're maybe trying to do that kind of stepped migration over to Fabric, you don't currently have that capability.
Yeah, you're going to have a bad time currently. Yeah, that's fair. And I think having a look around, some of the things that could be dynamic still aren't dynamic. So I think on your notebook selector, is that dynamic?
No. We're still picking from a list.
Yeah, and there's design patterns for that, right? So if I was saying I've got a Spark notebook which moves data from bronze into silver, and I just pass a parameter saying clean this table, clean this table, clean this table, you can make that work via a single notebook. But then it gives you much more flexibility if you can go clean all those tables using that notebook, clean that table using a different notebook because it's a special table, and it's slightly more advanced if you can parameterize everything. But then that does add complexity. So it's about design patterns and finding that trade-off. But if you're trying to doing that kind of stuff in Synapse currently, you might find it slightly jarring because it doesn't have that.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, exactly.
All right. So nothing in terms of it's not going to shock a lot of people who've been across both Power BI and Data Factory before. Yeah. You've got a lot of things from data flows that are going to be familiar. A lot of things from Data Factory that's going to be familiar. You do not have mapping data flows. So if someone's used mapping data flows before, that is not in Fabric. That is replaced by Power BI Gen Data Flow Gen 2.
Yeah. Essentially, that's where you're going for that approach. So it's familiar. It's taking that Power BI approach, which is kind of builds upon the whole kind of Fabric ethos of kind of moving into that Power BI space.
Yeah, cool, makes sense. But if anyone does have a huge Synapse implementation with lots and lots of mapping data flows, they're going to need to think about how they actually get that working with Fabric data flows to actually make that migration and move things over. So again, it's good for people to be aware of the bits where they can just go, oh, that's like a Data Factory pipeline. We can just take that entire concept and move it over. But not by importing the data pipelines, I assume?
It's something that's not there at the moment, but...
Yeah. So if you're trying to do it currently, you'd probably be looking at rebuilding those pipelines. Hopefully, they've built the pipelines in such a way that you only have a few number of pipelines that are dynamic anyway, so you should be able to rebuild them fairly quickly. But if people have a fairly sprawling set of integration pipelines and things that they're using in Synapse currently, or in straight Azure Data Factory, there's going to be an interesting migration story getting those things moved over.
Yep.
I can see the pain in your eyes from having had to do it. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So I think that gives people like a good flavor, a good background of what to expect, what's in here, what's not in here, where we want to see it going towards GA, right? The stuff that has to be in there for this to actually be a GA product, which is, source control and your ability to do DevOps and deploy these things and actually sort of get all this stuff stitched together. That is so important on the data platform side of things for people to be able to migrate from their existing platforms into Fabric and get to work with the rest of the stuff. So still stuff that we're hoping to see evolve, like sort of as we move towards GA. But otherwise, lots of good stuff and loads of things that people on the on the Power BI side will actually really, really benefit from in terms of orchestration tools and stitching these things together that you didn't really have before. Yeah,
it lowers the kind of barrier of entry for those as well, just having everything at your fingertips and not having to worry about a lot of those kind of link services and connections and authentication components when it's all in the same workspace, so it's contained in the same area.
Cool. All right, all makes sense. All right, well, thanks for joining us once again, Craig. I'll drag you back to talk about more of the Fabric experiences and start diving into some of the design patterns. It's going to be super interesting to do
I look forward to it.
Yeah, like a data factory design patterns, but done in Fabric needs to be something we can kind of get a bit of a video together in the future. All the things that we've been doing for years that people who are coming at it from a different direction might not have seen.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, I'll join you next time. Alrighty, so data factory experience inside of Microsoft Fabric. Loads and loads of good stuff, loads of things to get used to. Again, whether you're coming from data platforms or from the Power BI side into Fabric, you're going to have to learn the other side, whether you're going to have to figure out a little bit about data factory, how those pipelines works, how you get the maximum benefit from doing things like for each loops. Get a list of stuff, do the same thing for each thing in this list, then go and do some more stuff. There's so much you can do with it. It's well worth just digging into a lot of there's so much data factory learning resources out in the world, as well as all the stuff on Microsoft Learn. There's lots you can do to skill up on there. And then on the flip side of it, coming from the data platform stuff, so many things around there about the data flow things already. It's a very familiar experience, but just go and have a look. Go have a look at MS Learn. There's lots of stuff you can do in there to bring those kind of citizen ETL developers into the same world and get them working with everyone else. So really, really useful. Lots of stuff in there. Go and have a look at it. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers.